I know. Please tell Stalin that I can't make today's lunch meeting. I have so much work to do. I hope he'll understand. I mean, it's for the sake of the Soviet Union. Assalamu alaikum, comrades, and welcome to the first installment of Soviet Woman You Should Know. Today we're going to be talking about Dusya Vinogradova, and I happen to have a pamphlet about her. Of course I do. I'll share a little bit of what's inside of this later, but first, let me tell you about this amazing woman. Apologies for the cosplay. I'm accused of it so often I thought I might as well play it up a bit today. But yes. Have you heard of Dusya Vinogradova before? What Soviet woman are you aware of? And why are you only aware of a certain few? I find that the majority of Soviet women that the general public, or, maybe more niche interest-specific parts of the public are aware of, tend to be those who fought in the Great Patriotic War, or maybe those who found themselves in space. And sadly, especially when it comes to those who fought in war, they tend to be very fetishized and talked about in ways that I'm not a big fan of. We shouldn't have to go into every horrific detail of their struggle or torture in order to find them valuable human beings. Some of the most interesting Soviet women, in my opinion, are those who did generally non-assuming services for the general public, be it driving trams, aiding in education, or in this case, textile manufacturing. Now, in the 1930s, Dusya Vinogradova was the civilian Soviet superstar. Everyone knew her name and everyone knew everything about her. And her amazing feat? Handling the most weaving machines, setting an all-Union record, and even getting the Order of Lenin for how many weaving machines she could handle on her own, thus producing a significant amount of textiles for the general public. Now, the late 1920s and throughout the 1930s was a very special time in Soviet history, home of the Stakhonivite movement, later the Stakhonivite Vinogradovite movement. This was a time where workers found pride and energy in outperforming expectations. People were so enthralled with the promises and potential of a new Soviet society and what that would mean for their future and the future of their children. They were willing to sacrifice all and put everything they had into doing their daily tasks and achieving greatness in what some would say was mundane work. And so you had people like Dusya Vinogradova, and through the namesake of the Stakhonivite movement, Alexei Stakhanov, a miner, who excelled excessively at what they did and became heroes of the Soviet Union to model oneself after. It's very different than today's, hustle culture built on a capitalist society where people have to overwork themselves to afford simple things like food or rent. That sort of thing was already provided for the general public. What motivated these people was a genuine feeling of helping their people and creating this new future that was being envisioned at the time. Dusya was born in 1914 on August 1st, before the revolution even happened, and she began setting records when she was only 18 years old. Dusya entered school in 1929 with the intention of being a weaver just like her mother. When she graduated from trade school, she began working at the Vishuga textile factory. Initially, she worked with a set of 16 weaving machines, and then in 1933, moved to working with 26. Dusya mastered this. She demanded to work on a bigger set of machines. Meanwhile, Soviet experts who returned from a trip to America said that their factory weavers worked with 70 to 80 machines. As a result of hearing this, the factory management created a set of 70 automatic machines. They then entrusted the set onto Dusya. At the time, 70 machines became an all-Union record. At the same time, Pravda published an article on September 6, 1935 about the Soviet hero Alexei Stakhanov and his infamous mining record, beginning what would be known as the Stakhonivite movement. After the success and motivation of his story, it was decided to publish this story about Dusya as well. By September 12th, the Soviet people learned about the national record of service looms made in the Vishuga factory, and Dusya woke up famous. Then, on October 1st, in 1935, Dusya set a new record, going from 70 machines to 100. On the 15th of October that same year, in a meeting at the Kremlin with the chairman of People's Commissars of the USSR, V.M. Molotov, Dusya promised that she would operate 140 machines next. She was described as being very motivating, but also humble. She never set out to garner any sort of recognition. She genuinely felt passionate and capable. The atmosphere and circumstances of the time really aided in this. Young people had a feeling of importance, even in the small tasks of this new society. She really grasped the attention not only of the people of the Soviet Union, but of workers abroad who were looking to the Soviet Union at the time for inspiration of what their societies could be. Mostly socialists and communists, but workers active in unions in general often had heard of her. In this pamphlet, Soviet Sketches No. 1, produced by the Cooperative Publishing Society of Foreign Workers in the USSR in 1936 by G. Friedrich, is titled Miss USSR, The Story of Dusya Vinogradova. I personally find the title of Miss USSR, which Westerners gave her, a little bit demeaning. She deserves more than a pageant title. Perhaps it was her looks, to be honest. She was a very striking young woman and definitely stood out and fit Western beauty standards. But the fact that they insisted on calling her Miss USSR instead of her actual name is quite telling of the society that wrote this, though it was approved through a publishing society in the Soviet Union, not by born Soviets, however. But this pamphlet tells a story of Friedrich visiting Dusya, her factory, and even sitting down and having dinner with her. Something interesting that he gets to see and experience were all of the letters that were sent to Dusya in admiration and even competition. Let me read that to you. Every day, the postman brings a regular pile of letters to Dusya Vinogradova's address. Letters from every corner of the country. People write to her from the far north, from the south, east, and west. I have seen letters from Tashkent, from Azerbaijan, from Siberia, from the Caucasus, from Buryat, Mongolia. Her friend Vosyatina tells us. Boys and girls write to her, workers, collective farmers, aviators, engineers, Red Army men, seamen of the Red Fleet, teachers, actors, writers, scientists. Dusya Vinogradova does not know the people who write, and yet the letters are filled with a feeling of friendship. Dusya's face as she reads these letters is a mixture of happiness and confusion. There are too many of them. She'll never be able to answer them all. Here, for example, is a letter from the White Sea coast. Good morning, dear comrade Dusya. You may be quite sure that I, too, mean to join the ranks of our country's heroes. I want to tell you that we are starting on an expedition today. I am writing these lines on the job. Right in my seaplane, Dusya, as a sign of friendship, I've made up my mind to shoot a polar bear and send it to you as a present. Dusya confesses to me that she answered this correspondent saying it would be sufficient if he sent her the skin. I'd like to fly straight off to you, but of course I can't desert my post like that. The Soviets have given me a title of engineer, and I'm fighting hard to master technique, to conquer nature, and when we're through with our job, I'm going to fly straight over and see you. Up here, it's winter now, endless night, raging storms, cold, but we're conquering, exploring the north, fighting against nature. I see your photo in the papers, read about your records, and this inspires me to tackle my task of mastering military technique with still greater enthusiasm than before, to defend our fatherland, the USSR, which has given birth to people like you, Dusya, writes Michael Koroskin, a Red Army man from Leningrad. Lomanov, serving the Red Army out beyond Lake Baikal, writes Dusya that he is remaining in the army after his term of service has expired and promises her not to be guilty of a single dereliction of duty. There are many such letters promising to rival Dusya's achievements by achievements in other spheres. From the high mountain ranges of the Caucasus, we send Red Army greetings to our renowned countrywoman Dusya Vinogradova. We too shall not be behindhand. We are completing our studies with splendid success, writes a group of students at the military academy. Young pioneers from Gorky write that they are proud of Dusya, that they will now do all they can to become the best pioneer group in the city. Comrade Tolkov, a student at the School of Propagandists in Shuya, comments on Dusya's happy life possible only in the Soviet Union and begs her not to get swell-headed, not to become dizzy with success. Comrade Martinov, on the other hand, who is working as an aviation instructor in Koktebel, makes her the following proposal. Please let me know what education you have received, what political and general training. I would like to challenge you to competition and study. Though I am very busy, I would like to compete with you in self-teaching and self-education. Your example is contagious. Red Army man Nikolai Zignost writes, I have read about you and fallen in love with you. Of course, there's some of those. And so, Dusya, I feel very deeply that I'd like to get acquainted with one of the best girls in the Soviet Union, whose frontiers I defend, and that's you. We could give each other the best advice. And how many wonderful letters Dusya gets from young mill girls in the textile industry. They love her like a sister. Indeed, they are her sisters at work. These girls who live perhaps at the opposite end of the country, but who are doing the same job as she. Do you know, Dusya, writes Nedya Chernyakova, woman weaver in the Red Echo Mill of Pereslov, I think you are just the same as other people, only you love your job and are anxious to give the country more goods of better quality. But I love my mill too, so why shouldn't I work like you do? I've decided to follow your example, and I've fulfilled my plan 115% without any spoiled output. Dusya Pludanitskaya and Raya Komenko, women workers in the Stalin textile mill in Tashkent, write that they were fired by Dusya's example and began working first on 24, then 36, and at last 100 looms. You're lucky, writes Klava Onisimova from Kirov. Enthusiastically, the whole USSR acknowledges you as one of our country's best workers, calls you a heroine, though you're not a pilot or an engineer and haven't performed any deed of heroism. I know it's not for the sake of glory that you're mastering technique and breaking records, and now I'd like to be as much of use to our country as you are. And the next paragraph after this is aptly titled, Dusya, one of many. The Stakhonivite movement is spreading like wildfire over the whole Soviet country. Dusya is but one of many. In her own mill, there is her namesake, Dusya Vinogradova, her sister. There is the woman weaver Peroblayeva, both of whom, inspired by her example, are also working on 216 looms. In the neighboring textile mill, there is Tasya Udentsova, who has started a competition with these three and does not mean to be left behind. This is how much she was inspiring people by just handling more machines than she was ever expected to. Of course, successfully. There's even a Soviet film inspired by her, though not telling her exact story. Since she became recognized as the female leader of the Stakhonivite movement, and used as an inspiration for young women all over the Soviet Union, it made sense that she would inspire a film. Actress Lyubov Orlova played Vinogradova in G. Alexandrov's film The Bright Path, which came out in 1940. When Dusya went to the first all-union conference of Stakhonivites, she said this in her speech. If there will be workers who will operate 144 machines, then we will move on to 150. If someone declares that goes to 150, then we will take 200 machines. We have a record and will not give it to anyone. It was at the end of 1935 that Dusya was granted the Order of Lenin award. On receiving the Order of Lenin, Friedrich had this to say. Yes, it is true, Dusya is not a girl who has won a prize in a beauty contest, despite calling her Miss USSR, but you know. Nor does she owe her fame to participation in a dance marathon. She has not starved for 14 days in a glass case, nor did she sit for 10 days on top of a flagpole. These are feats which earn a person transitory fame under the capitalist system. Dusya Vinogradova has won fame and honor by plain, honest work. Under socialism, it is work that ennobles, makes famous. The highest Soviet decoration, the Order of Lenin, has been given to Dusya. The Soviet Order is an imperishable badge of honor. It testifies to the whole country's respect for honest work well done. It is recognition for socially useful labor, for truly productive work, and this badge of honor and glory is rightfully worn by Dusya Vinogradova and other foremost Stakhonivites. People in our country, said Stalin, do not work for exploiters, for the enrichment of parasites, but for themselves, for their own class, for their own Soviet society, where government is wielded by the best members of the working class. That is why labor in our country has social significance and is a matter of honor and glory. Under capitalism, labor bears a private and personal character. You have produced more. Well, Then receive more and live the best you can. Nobody knows you or wants to know you. You work for the capitalists, you enrich them? Well, what do you expect? That is why they hired you, so that you should enrich the exploiters. You do not agree with that? Well, join the ranks of the unemployed and exist as best you can. We shall find others, more tractable. That is why people's labor is not valued very highly under capitalism. Under such conditions, of course, there can be no room for the Stakhonivite movement. But the case is different under the Soviet system. Here, the man who labors is held esteem. Here, he works not for exploiters, but for himself, for his class, for society. Here, the man who labors cannot feel neglected and solitary. On the contrary, the man who labors feels himself a free citizen of his country. In a way, a public figure. And if he works well and gives society all he can, he is a hero of labor and is covered with glory. Obviously, the Stakhonivite movement could have only arisen under such conditions. Through the height of her fame and afterwards, Dusya and her factory would continue to have friendly challenges with neighboring textile mills and factories across the Soviet Union to inspire more progress. She would also give speeches for the entire country, inspiring people further. By 1938, after already receiving the Order of Lenin and gaining more experience and knowledge, Dusya and her sister Marusya were able to work 284 machines. On December 12, 1937, the first elections to the Supreme Soviet of the USSR were held. Dusya was elected. She was the deputy of the USSR Supreme Council of the First Convocation from 1937 to 1946. As a deputy, she wrote letters with complaints and requests. They had to resolve issues raised by voters. It was in 1941 that Dusya graduated from the Moscow Industrial Academy with a degree in process engineering. At first, she worked as the head of the technical control department at her native factory. But with the outbreak of war, she was sent to Tashkent, where she worked as a deputy chief engineer at a new factory. Since September 1942, Dusya has been working in Moscow as deputy director of the Semyonov dyeing and finishing factory, and then as the director of the Rostokino textile and knitwear factory. In 1948 to 1952, she was the head of the department for the training of master technologists at the central courses of the USSR Ministry of Light Industry. She would also go on to marry an artist of the Ivanovo Drama Theater, Isai Rozovsky, and together they would have 2 children. Sadly, Dusya would die rather young, on September 7th of 1962, from lung disease. Now, that can be directly linked to the kind of textile work that she did. I mean, she was only 48 years old and worked efficiently her whole life. Technically, what she died of was called, and forgive me if I say this wrong, bisonosis. It's a disease of the lungs. It's caused by breathing in cotton dust or dust from other vegetable fiber while at work. It's the most common disease for textile workers to die from. And of course, early on, they didn't know the direct links to this, and she was likely exposed to even more toxins at the dyeing factories that she was at. They just didn't have the safety precautions that we had today, and due to her great achievements and extensive overwork of herself for the sake of the Soviet people, she was even more exposed than her other comrade weavers. While I'm sure we could analyze Dusya's life and critique the ways that she was used as propaganda, ultimately, it was harmless and only helped motivate young people to achieve great things for their country, minus the lung disease. But I think it's important to recognize people like Dusya, like the Soviet Union did at this time. No, she didn't directly die for her country or kill fascists or become brutally wounded through some horrific and heroic accident or feat, but she really represented this sort of common man. She didn't have to do something extreme. She was just really, really good at her job and motivated to be better. And that motivation was contagious and easily used through propaganda, through speeches organized by the state, given by Dusya. It was easily understood and really spoke to people. She was the average Soviet woman, and through her, people realized, I can achieve great things for my country too. She represented a new image, a new era, and this sort of inspirational atmosphere that I personally love from this specific time of Soviet history, before the war, where young people thought that they could achieve and do anything, where there was so much hope for what the Soviet Union could become and what they have promised. It's a magical time to think about, to be inspired by someone like her in that era, not from a place of egotism or monetary gain, but because one knows that they can do it, and through personal achievements can better society. And that, I think, is really neat. In fact, I think it is so neat that I named my new cat Dusya after Dusya Vinogradova. I just woke her, so she's very, very sleepy. But she is Russian. She's a Siberian, so she's got a big name to live up to. And I love her very much. She's so fluffy and cute. It is a very niche thing to name a cat after, so when people ask, I genuinely have to go over what I just told you. But that's how much I love Dusya Vinogradova. I've named my cat after her. She's so sleepy. I feel like such a bad cat mom. I've just woken her up for nothing. So through Kitty Comrade Dusya, her legacy lives on, and hopefully you have learned and been inspired through what I've told you of today. Also, side note, I raised enough money through my GoFundMe, which you may have seen me post about, to purchase a document/book scanner, and I have ordered it today, and it is coming, so look forward to pamphlets like these finally being digitized and accessible. I don't know how long it will take, but as soon as my machine arrives, I will try to master it like Dusya mastered the weaving machines, and we'll see what happens. So be patient with me, but I'm so excited to embark on this new project and become familiar with that sort of archival process. Really, I can't thank you enough. I wouldn't have been able to purchase that and start digitizing my collection without your help, and it really means a lot. And if you'd like to support my future work and the labor that I will be putting into scanning and uploading those sort of documents, you can subscribe to my Patreon, or maybe give me a one-time donation on PayPal. Links to everything will be below, but I greatly appreciate you. So thank you so much for your help, comrades. Please be inspired by history, and have a great day. All right. Goodbye.